Hey, how's it going? My name's Brandon, and I'm a street photographer from Kansas City. But I lived in Brazil for a few years after I graduated college. And while I was down there, I worked as a second shooter for a couple different wedding photographers. And I through that process, I just learned a lot about photography in general. So composition, lighting, and just a bunch of other stuff. And I've been applying those concepts that I learned to my street photography ever since. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of what I learned from doing wedding photography and how I've been applying it to street photography is composition. Um, so through doing wedding photography, like I learned a lot about filling the frame. And that's a concept that works in wedding photography, event photography, street photography, um, really any type of photography. Like a big part of it is filling the frame. Like a lot of times, what um, what makes a photo fail, I think, is that it has too much negative space, or there are just uninteresting areas of the photo. And by filling the frame, yeah, you create visual interest throughout every part of the photo. So in wedding photography, the photographer who I primarily worked for, he was into street photography as well, just like me, and he placed a lot of importance on layering and using that as a composition device to make more interesting photos for weddings. And so through the process of doing wedding photography, I learned like just how to look for opportunities for layering. And a lot of times that included finding a subject that is, sitting or standing still, and including them as the first layer in your photograph, placing them, maybe in the right or left corner of the photograph, and then looking for other subjects to fill the frame behind them. Another way that you can do this is find subjects a little bit further away from you, put them in a background layer, and then wait for other subjects to come, from the sides of the frame or just other areas throughout the frame, and they'll walk into the frame to create a more interesting and dynamic composition. Um, like I don't think it's all that interesting to have like single subject photographs, like with the background blurred out, and overdoing the bokeh thing, especially for like a wedding or event where the people there, they have relationships with each other. It's like family and friends, and so like you want to kind of like show that interaction between people, and not just like single people out for images, although that can work. But I just find it more interesting to do the whole layers thing, and like a frame within a frame type of technique. So for the next point, which is kind of an add-on to the last point, is using smaller apertures like f5.6 or f8. I really like f8 because typically you can get everything in the frame in focus, and like this is like there are plenty of wedding photographers out there who don't shoot like this. Like they shoot wide open, and they'll you know just try to blur out every possible background that they possibly can. And while it can work, I just think it, it makes for less compelling images, at least if you're like going for layered photographs. Um, like if you have a subject or subjects in the foreground of an image, uh, and you know, you focus on them and, you know, blur everything out of the background. Like there might be something interesting happening behind them, um, and yeah, you just don't get that context when you use like a really shallow depth of field. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is just getting over fear of photographing people, which, you know, in street photography, it's typically candid people in the streets, and at weddings, it's like, you know, you're there with your professional gear, and like the people know that, you know, you're a paid photographer there to photograph the wedding, and so like when you know, go around taking photos, you know, during the ceremony or at the reception or whatever, like the people will, you know, notice that you're taking their photographs, and sometimes they'll, like, you know, get together and smile for a group portrait, and that's great and everything, but a lot of times, a lot of what I did and what the photographer who I worked with like encouraged me to do is to do, you know, candids, just to really show, like, you know, the realness of the day, of a wedding day, and yeah, that's obviously something that you can take and apply to street photography. But yeah, the great thing about doing it for wedding photography was that, like, you know, people don't care. Like they're not like all suspicious about what you're doing, and they're not, you know, offended by you taking their photos, which I think a lot of street photographers, or, you know, people starting out with street photography, they have that fear of, you know, what's going to happen if I take this person's photo, and I think just doing wedding photography helped me get those repetitions in, and yeah, like it's not like no one has like never confronted me on the street, or, you know, asked me, you know, why did you do that? Like, what are you doing? Why are you taking photos around here or whatever? But like, I just, you know, have those multiple experiences of doing it in weddings and on the street, and so I just, you know, I'm not afraid of it anymore, partly because I know that, like, for the most part, nothing is going to happen. Like, even if, even when people have, like, you know, skeptically asked me, like, what I was doing, like, once I got a chance to just explain myself real quick, you know, like, they just don't care. So the next thing I think wedding photography helped me with was anticipating moments. So with wedding photography, you have to be ready for like when the bride and groom kiss at the end of the ceremony, or like when the priest or preacher hands out the wedding rings, things like that. And of course, you're not going to have like those scripted moments when you're doing street photography. But I do think that there's something to be said for that, just like making me more open to anticipating something that's going to happen on the street. So also, wedding photography definitely helped me see light better, and the lighting that like I looked for in wedding photography was, you know, was different than what I typically looked or what I look for in street photography. As like I looked for backlighting a lot of times in wedding photography to get this like kind of glowy images, which I think look nice for wedding photography, but I learned that that's not really what I'm looking for typically in street photography. I'd rather it be, coming laterally from the side. But yeah, it definitely made me think a lot more about light. The last thing I'd like to talk about is just the practice that I got doing wedding photography. Like I was out, all day shooting, even when I was tired and felt like I, had nothing left to give. I had to, keep on taking photos or keep on holding that light stand. Yeah, like just the whole experience of that was just a whole lot of practice. Yeah, there was a time period when I thought I would, go into business on my own, doing wedding photography and running my own wedding photography business, but yeah, I kind of decided that it's not really for me. Like it's not my idea of a good time to be like on my feet photographing for 16 hours straight or whatever. Yeah, I definitely appreciate and respect what wedding photographers do, and I'm just really glad for the experience that I had that just added to my overall photography experience and journey. So would I say that you should, as a street photographer, you should go out there and start photographing weddings? I mean, no, but if it sounds like something that you'd be interested in doing and something that you would like doing, then I see it only as a positive experience. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this one. Thanks for watching.